about a week before my AP statistics exam, not at SRDS, I realized that over the course of the year, I didn't really learn anything, and that I was screwed for the actual test. That week was spent cramming everything I could into my brain in desperate hope to do well on the test. Now, of course, when I sat down to take the test, I forgot most of it and did pretty terribly. Many students have felt the same sense of being overwhelmed. In fact, the average student studies almost an hour every day. But a lot of this time is wasted because we don't study effectively. So today, I'm going to explain why the brain remembers what it does and how it can use this information to study more effectively. First, let's understand a concept called working memory. Working memory is the type of memory we use to accomplish a task. So for example, when you learned to tie your shoes, somebody probably showed you how to tie them, and then you used your working memory to replicate their actions and do the task of tying your own shoes. And now, of course, this information is in your long-term memory. You're not going to forget how to tie your shoes anytime soon. And now studies show that the connection between working memory and long-term memory is very strong, stronger than that between short-term memory and long-term memory. So, if we want to remember things, we need to engage our working memories. And one way to do this is through focus. Now, I know what you're saying, of course, Thomas, if I focus better, I study better, duh, right? But we don't realize how distracted we are. Every time you pick up your phone, every time you're focusing on anything other than material, that's a distraction. Let's take music as an example. Music can help you focus more because it boosts your mood. The thing is, often it distracts more than it helps. Studies show that when you listen to music with lyrics or jazz music, your brains just tend to focus on the music rather than the material you're trying to learn. Whereas, as much as I sound like a nerd right now, low energy classical music or electronic music seems to be less distracting than helpful. Another way to focus better is to take breaks. Our brains can't work for hours and hours at a time. We need time to relax and recharge. Many people like to use the Pomodoro technique, where you work for 25 minutes, rest for 5. Work for 25, rest for 5. And for me personally, I like to have a timer in view, so I can tell myself, okay, I only have to work for 15 more minutes till my break, 10 more minutes till my break, 5 more minutes till my break. But what we do on our breaks is also extremely important, right? This was all too often me. But what seems to be the best strategy is to just go outside. It releases endorphins, which again boosts our mood, allows us to focus better. And also it's a nice change of scenery. Who wants to be stuck inside studying for hours at a time? Let's go back to this concept of working memory. The thing about working memory is not all of it is actually converted into long-term memory. For example, I had a locker freshman year, and every time I opened my locker, I would use my working memory to remember my locker combination in order to accomplish the task of opening my locker. The thing is, somewhere along the line, I forgot my locker combination and also my locker number. And for the rest of the year, I just couldn't use my locker because my brain didn't think that information was important enough to keep in my long-term memory. So how do our brains decide what's important, what to remember and what not to remember? Well, there are 3 factors. There's urgency, repetition, and association. Urgency is the idea that if our brain is receiving a lot of stress hormones, that means something really important must be going on, and we have to remember it. That's why often if we go through something really scary or really stressful, we remember it in vivid detail years later. The thing is, we can't really control urgency, and it's not like we want stress hormones in our bodies anyways, right? Long-term stress can actually lead to memory loss, the very thing we want to avoid, along with a whole ton of other downsides, which means that repetition and association are the keys. Well, what is repetition? Repetition is the idea that if we repeat something, our brains think it's important, and therefore it stays in our memory for longer. I used to have 100 digits of pi memorized. Now I don't. And the reason for this was because after I had memorized my 100 digits of pi, I didn't care enough to keep that in my memory. So that information wasn't repeated, and my brain correctly thought that that information wasn't important. and so my brain dropped it from my memory. As another example, take when you studied for your finals last year. I know I had to spend a lot more time on the material from September than the material from May, because the material from September hadn't been repeated in months and months and months, whereas the material from May was fresh in my mind, and my brain still thought it was important. The thing is, not all repetition is created equal. Active recall is extremely important. Active recall is assigning yourself practice tests, essentially, to test your memory. Now, this engages our working memories because it gives us a task, a practice test, to focus on. And these practice tests might not always be what you think they'd be. For example, I play piano, and whenever I have to memorize something on the piano, the only way to make sure I have it memorized is to play it without the sheet music in front of me. This is a practice test. I'm testing how much of the piece I can remember without the sheet music in front of me. In the same way, if we assign practice tests to ourselves, it boosts our memory considerably. Now, we can move on to association. Association is the idea that if you have something really complex, but you can associate that with something simple or something we already remember, then this complex thing becomes a lot easier to remember. Let's take a more concrete example. Imagine if I asked you to memorize this string of 10 letters. I'd imagine that'd be pretty hard. It'd be hard for me, I know. But now imagine if I asked you to memorize another string of 10 letters. Now, this second string of 10 letters isn't random. We associate it with the English word technology. So this string of 10 letters becomes a lot easier to memorize than the first one, which probably has no meaning to anybody. As another example, take the order of operations. By associating the whole parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, etc., with the easy-to-remember word PEMDAS, we can easily remember the whole order of operations. So in the same way, if we give ourselves mnemonics and use this tactic of association to associate complex things with simple things, then these complex things become a lot easier to remember. Now, it's not only what we're doing while we're studying, but also what we do when we're not studying that makes all the difference, which means we have to sleep. It comes with so many more benefits than just studying, but it's also when long-term memories are stored. So if you get less sleep, that's less memories that are being stored in your long-term memory, and that's less stuff you're going to remember. So that's why when I want to memorize something, I do it right before I go to sleep, so that it's right there in my working memory, ready to become long-term memory. So how do we get better sleep? Well, there are a lot of answers, more than I can go over here, but stick to a set sleeping schedule. Try to go to sleep and wake up at the same time every day if possible. Exercise during the day. Get yourself tired enough to sleep. Avoid screens an hour before bed. The blue light from electronic screens inhibits our ability to produce melatonin, which is extremely important for sleep. And listen to music. A study of college students with insomnia found that listening to music, again, low energy classical or electronic music, actually had similar effects on sleep than prescription drugs did. And this is thought to be because of a phenomenon called entrainment, where our heartbeat actually syncs with the music. And this, if you're listening to slow, low-energy music, it lowers our heart rate, which means we can sleep better. So to wrap things up, use your working memory. This is the most important thing in this entire talk. If you don't use your working memory, you won't remember things. It's as simple as that. Use repetition. If you don't repeat stuff, your brain thinks it's not important, and it won't remember the stuff. Use association. Use mnemonics to make things easier to remember. Use active recall, because this activates your working memory. Assign yourself practice tests. And use the Pomodoro technique. Take breaks so that you can focus better. Again, our brains can't work for hours and hours at a time. And folks, that's a wrap. And please, don't forget to sleep. Thank you.